Good evening, my fellow children of the night, and welcome to my campfire. Tonight, I'll be bringing you an original by one of our very own children of the night out there, Journey's End by Feenix. So grab your headphones and kill the lights, because it's time for some terror. He never had time for the small-minded. He'd gone through his life despising the little tricks, linguistic and otherwise, people would employ to avoid thinking. Standing in her hospital room at the end, he would have appreciated a cliché, and looking back, he could see them now for what they were. Truths so universal that, once aphorized, they could be passed down through the generations, their wisdom never waning in the retelling. For all the many times he had been in that room and others like it, their impersonal nature never failed to amaze and sadden him. It was in a room like that which he would now occupy, Spartan, chalk white, surrounded by small minds, that David had watched his mother die. More accurately, from every perspective that mattered to him, her body had died. The person she was, the woman who had raised him, had nurtured him, had tried to understand him when others could not. That person had died more than a year before. Dementia is a unique horror in a world teeming with it. Not only does it kill, but it destroys everything that makes one who they are. Their memories, their loved ones, their past. All are sacrificed on the altar of entropy, until there's little left for death's hand to claim. After death, though the humors settle and the organs succumb, an electrical charge remains in the body for a period of time. In the more lucid moments of his youth, David had wondered whether that was all eternity amounted to. The passing of an electrical charge over a finite period with no consciousness to measure it may seem to last forever. Like the sleep of a man who awakens after a journey, neither knowing nor caring how long it had taken to reach his destination. Is that, he wondered, what the great mystery amounted to? The last flickers of a dying lamp before, its spark extinguished, darkness falls. Fuck it, he thought with a wry smile. People always said he thought too much, and it surprised no one when he had majored in philosophy as a student, leaving Cambridge with a starred first in the subject. Beyond her passing, David found only confusion. His mind, always fragile and dichotomous, had broken, and he had ended up in the very hospital where his mother had spent her last moments. His stay just long enough that he feared it was where he too belonged. When he left some months later, his steps might have rattled, so numerous were the medications prescribed to his dull pain. In time, these had reduced in number until his mind was considered somewhat stable, yet he retained the depression and anxiety that had come to categorize many of his adult years and experiences, as if his greatest achievements paled to the sadness he felt when faced with things he had believed he had wanted: a family, a career, a normal life. His life had not been easy, but he had not sought an easy life, and this, he felt, distinguished him. Until now, alone, all he had was himself. He was still just young enough to have a meager career, and so he did, becoming a part-time lecturer at the local university. He found he had a talent for teaching, one that many had seen in him, though it had taken him decades to see within himself. And he, much to his surprise, came to enjoy it. Within 2 years of re-entering the world, a phrase commensurate with his love of the dramatic, he met Jennifer and was alone no longer. 10 years his junior, she worked in a local hotel and their meeting was purely by chance in a local bar. They immediately recognized that they each possessed a rare ability to know what the other needed and to be able to provide it with little effort. Their passion for each other grew over the following months, and a single year from their first meeting, they were married and within another were joined by a daughter. After some small deliberation, they decided to name her Elizabeth, the middle name of David's late mother. It was when his daughter was 3 years old that he noticed the strange sound in his head, like an old kettle sat upon a stove. It had started as little more than a hushed whisper, scarcely more intrusive than the wing beats of a moth in a glass jar. As time passed, the sound grew, and with it came a feeling he could not hope to name. The din invaded his sleep, rousing him first after 5 hours, then after only 3. When he could sleep for no more than an hour and a half, he decided, once again, to contact his doctor. Tests were performed and questions asked, all to no avail. He'd never considered returning to psychotherapy, surely useless after so many years. But he could think of no other avenue down which to seek his answers, and so appointments were made. Therapy had always been a puzzle to him. Seemingly obvious revelations with the unmistakable ring of truth would surface as if buried in his soul. His younger days were no longer a mystery to him. Sessions with a counselor in his late 20s had seen to that, and his conscious mourning of his mother had dispelled. But the events of these past years, it seemed, had taken a toll all their own. He came to reason that death, for all that it takes, can provide the living with a single gift. We consider the suffering that the departed has experienced has ended, that they have found peace. Beneath this, however, some minds can never be sure, and it is that very doubt that binds us to those lost in irons of subconscious grief. For his part, David had never truly accepted his mother's passing, had not even attended her funeral, in fact. And though it would be the hardest duty of his life, his next action was as clear as it was necessary. He would visit the crematorium that handled her body, his family beside him. The cacophony in his head, a psychological imperative to do what he knew he must. It made sense to him to visit his mother. He could think of it in no other terms. On the day of her funeral. Increasingly neurotic, in the days prior to their trip, David wanted each step to be planned exhaustively. They would drive to the Chapel of Remembrance, would approach it together, and he would go inside alone. After a moment, his family would join him, and they would pay their respects, and then leave without ceremony. The thought of returning to that place made him shudder. Crematoria had always reminded him of a tour he had once taken of the death camps of Eastern Europe, their broken shells retaining something of the fear, pain, and finally of the resignation of those who had suffered there. No, this would not be an easy journey, but it was one he could no longer delay. Finally, the appointed day arrived. As a family, David, his wife, and their daughter drove to the old crematorium in the late afternoon. David parked the car and alighted, his wife exiting the passenger side to take his hand, and together they helped their daughter from the vehicle. Hand in hand, they walked through the hallowed gates, first through the beautiful gardens and on to the chapel. David was thankful that it was empty. A small, dignified chamber, unoccupied save for a table on which rested the Book of Remembrance, flanked by 2 vases of flowers. He looked to his wife, who gave a small nod of encouragement, her eyes beginning to veil with tears, and to his daughter. As she so often did, Elizabeth wore a look at once curious and totally unreadable on her delicate features. He smiled at her and nodded, and his hand was on the door, his foot on the old stone step. He walked through the door, his own eyes glazed, and approached the table. At once, two things happened. While the first surprised him, nothing in his life could have prepared him for what was to follow. In any other circumstances, it would constitute a triviality, the soft closing of a door. Confused, he tried it only to find it locked. As he did so, the sound in his head became a voice. The voice he knew so well. "You've come at last. Don't be afraid. I wish you only love. Since the day I left you, I've needed to tell you a story. There was once a man who loved someone very much, to the point that he believed his life would collapse if he lost them. For all his fear of being without them, however, there was something he dreaded far more: that his loved one would be taken from him before they died. So what do you think happened to this man, David? You should have let me go, my son. You should have let me go." The melancholy voice trailed off as, tears streaming down his face, David looked back to the heavy door, ajar as it had been. Looking down at the book, cursing himself as he read his mother's name, a simple sentence came to his breath: "What you fear is what you find." At that moment, a new and terrible sound filled his ears. The author and cause of the shriek was beyond his understanding, and he wondered at first that it might not be human, as if some mythical beast had been slaughtered here in these grounds. He'd heard nothing like it before, and knew that he would not again. Seized by panic, he flung wide the chapel door, and wished that he had not. His wife, kneeling, inconsolable, her daughter in her arms, as lifeless as a stone. And that's all for now, my fellow children of the night. Give Feenix some love in the comments below. I always love narrating his stuff. Man, you are an incredible writer. All relevant links are in the description below. If you want to support the channel, why don't you share around your favorite videos of mine? Or, of course, you could throw $1 my way on Patreon. You gain exclusive access to content available only to my patrons when you do so. That's about it for the outro. Seriously, if any of my other children of the night out there, if you guys are writers and you want me to cover your stuff, send it on over through my Cornbread's Campfire at gmail.com. All one word, all lowercase, no apostrophe. That way, I can cover your story as well. I really, really enjoy having that facet to my channel where those of you who, those of you who write your own scary stories, you can send them on in. And if I like them, if I feel like they're going to fit in with the channel, I'll definitely put them up. I appreciate all of my children of the night out there, all my patrons, and specifically Feenix for this story. You did a great job, man. Keep the horror alive until my next release, my fellow children of the night. And may the darkness always be but a step away.